You write a plugin class with a before method, an around method, maybe an after method. You never register it as an event listener, you never call it yourself, and no other class in your module references it by name. And yet Magento calls it, in the right order, every single time the target method runs. Today we open the real source behind the interceptor trait every generated interceptor class uses, and the plugin list class that actually decides which plugin runs when, and trace exactly how a plugin declared in XML turns into a method call in the middle of your request. Welcome back to Magento Development Deep Dive. Part 3 covered dependency injection, how an interface resolves to a concrete class. Part 4 covers what happens to that class afterward, interception. We're going to read the actual interceptor trait every generated interceptor uses, and the plugin list class from the same tag, 2.4.9, commit shared with the last 3 parts, so every file path and line number you see is something you can open yourself. By the end of this part, 5 things should click. What a plugin element in di.xml actually attaches to a concrete target class, not an interface, which is a different mechanism from the preferences we covered in part 3. Why the class Magento actually instantiates for you as a generated interceptor, or real PHP class that wraps a shared trait, not the trait by itself. What order before, around, and after plugins run in when several are stacked on the same method. How PluginList's getNext method drives the around plugin chain recursively, one link at a time, instead of looping. And why an around plugin holds real power, it can choose never to call the original method at all. Strip away the code generation, and interception in Magento is 5 stages. Declare, a module's di.xml file attaches a plugin element to a target class, giving it a name, a plugin class, and an optional sort order. Generate, Magento's code generator creates an actual interceptor class that extends the target class and uses the shared interceptor trait. It's a real file on disk in the generated directory, not magic at runtime. Init, the first time that interceptor is built, its ____init method loads the plugin list service. Intercept, calling any intercepted method on that object actually calls ____call plugins instead of the real method directly. And chain, that method runs every before listener, then either an around listener or the original method, then every after listener, in that exact order. A few things help before we dig in. Part 3, on dependency injection, is genuinely useful context here, since plugins are declared inside the same di.xml files and the same type elements as preferences and constructor arguments. Either a real Magento 2.4.9 checkout, or the GitHub tag open in a browser tab, so you can follow along. Comfort reading PHP closures and basic XML is enough. You don't need any prior experience with interception or aspect-oriented frameworks. We'll build the vocabulary from the real source. This is the same real block we glanced at in part 3, and it's the right place to start part 4. Unlike a preference, which redirects an interface to a class, a plugin element attaches directly to a concrete target class here, the full category product reindex action, and the attribute resource model. Each plugin gets a unique name and a type, the class Magento will instantiate and call methods on. Nothing in full or in the resource model class needed to change for this to work. The target class doesn't know a plugin exists. This is the actual trait method every generated interceptor class runs first. ____init fetches the plugin list service straight from the object manager, and record subject type is the parent class. The real target class the interceptor extends, found with PHP's own getParentClass function. That subject type string is what every later lookup into the plugin list will key on. The method exists check at the bottom means if the parent class itself defines its own ____init, that runs too, so nothing gets silently skipped. This is the exact loop that runs every before plugin registered for a method, in order. For each one, it fetches the plugin instance from plugin list, builds the expected method name before, plus the capitalized method name and calls it, passing the subject and the current arguments. If that before method returns anything other than null, its return value replaces the arguments passed onward, which is exactly how a before plugin can rewrite what the original method, or the next plugin, actually receives. This branch is the heart of the whole mechanism. If an around plugin is registered, Magento first calls PluginList's getNext to find whatever comes after this one in the chain, another around plugin, or nothing, and passes that as plugin info for the next call. Then it calls the around method itself, handing it the subject, and critically, next to closure the plugin can call whenever it decides the original logic should actually run. If there's no around plugin at all, the else branch just calls the real method directly through _____ call parent. After the around branch resolves, one way or the other, every after plugin runs in this loop. Each one gets the subject, the result so far, and the original arguments, and its own return value becomes the new result passed into the next after plugin in the chain. Notice the pattern across all three loops. Before rewrites arguments, around can replace the entire call. After rewrites the result, three different rewrite points, all driven by the exact same current plugin info array built earlier. All of what we just walked through before, around, after is actually the body of a single closure named next, defined earlier in ____ call plugins. This is where it finally gets invoked, once, with the original arguments. The reason it's a closure at all, rather than a plain method, is so an around plugin's next parameter can literally be this same closure recursing into the next plugin in the chain, which is exactly what getNext, in plugin list, decides. Every getPlugin call in the interceptor trait routes through this method. It checks an internal cache, keyed by target type and plugin code, and only asks the object manager to build the plugin instance the first time it's needed. Every subsequent call for that same type and code returns the cached object. The class name it builds comes from _inherited, an array already populated from every di.xml plugin declaration across the whole system, merged well before this method ever runs. This is the method we saw called back in step 4, right before an around plugin runs. It makes sure scoped configuration is loaded, makes sure this type's inherited plugin data has actually been resolved, then builds a key from the type, the method, and the current plugin's own code, and looks up whatever comes next in _processed. That's the entire trick behind chaining multiple around plugins on one method. Each one's next closure, when called, re-enters ____ call plugins with exactly this next link already resolved. A few things trip people up here. Plugins attach to a concrete class, or something in its relation chain, not to an interface the way a preference does, which is why plugging an interface method sometimes silently does nothing if the wrong class is targeted. An around plugin that never calls its next parameter isn't just skipping the original method's side effects, it's skipping every plugin still queued after it too, which is a common source of half-working extensions. Sort order between several plugins on the same method comes from PluginList's own merge and sort logic, not simply the ordered di.xml files happen to load in. And because an interceptor has to literally extend the target class, final classes, final methods, and private methods can never be intercepted, there's no subclass Magento can generate. Let's pull Interception back together. A plugin element in di.xml attaches a plugin class to a concrete target type, not an interface. Magento generates a real interceptor class that extends that target and uses the shared interceptor trait to do the actual work. ____ call plugins runs every before listener, then either an around listener or the real original method, then every after listener, always in that order. Plugin lists getPlugin lazily builds and caches each plugin instance, while getNext is what actually drives the around plugin chain, one link at a time. And only an around plugin, by choosing not to call its next parameter, can skip the original method running at all. That's how Magento actually calls your plugins, straight from the pin 2.4.9 source with every file and line cited. Part 5 moves to a different extension point entirely: observers and events, events.xml, and the event manager class that actually dispatches them. If you want the rest of this series as it publishes, subscribe now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in part 5.